Hello and welcome to Ivory Blush Roses. My name is Lisa, and today we're going to take a look at a piece of stitching that I did many years ago, and I recently found something to finish this, and so I thought you might enjoy seeing how I finish a different kind of project today. This piece of silk ribbon embroidery is one that I did way back when I very first started stitching. And I'll put the year up on the screen because truthfully I don't remember. I've had it for years and I just never quite knew what to do with it. I've loved it and many other people have loved it too. I know on this Crazy Quilt International Facebook site they've used it as a header for a very long time. I've always wanted to do something with it, but like I said, I had no idea what I wanted to do with it. I went thrifting a few weeks ago and I found this little shelf, and I immediately thought that it looked like this opening would fit that piece. It was my initial immediate thought. That would fit my silk ribbon embroidery piece. It only cost me $7 or something like that. So I brought it home. Let's take a look here. It fits top to bottom just about perfectly. Now I did have to add about an inch on either side, and I did that a couple weeks ago where I added some more silk ribbon embroidery here, and that's going to work really well. There's a couple things before I add this into the frame. One is this bunny is a shank button, and this was done in the days before I had any idea how to attach a shank button, and so I need to fix that before I can use it. I also need to paint the shelf because it's got this sort of antique-y finish that looks dirty to me, and I think I want to paint it a clearer off-white. I have the paint and I'll be doing that, and I will do that off camera. I'm not going to show you that process. But I wanted to show you the process of getting this ready to frame, and then I'll show you the end result. I've cut myself a piece of mat board that I'll be stretching this on. And you may notice that if I put it on the back, there's not much room. So I think I may add just a little strip of muslin around the top and bottom sides so that I can get a little more tension going. But the other thing I need to deal with is this bunny button because it sits. Let's see if I can show you. You can see how high it sits off the fabric. It's quite a ways and it always wobbles, and I've never liked that. But when I did it originally, I actually cut a hole and did some buttonhole stitch around it. And you can see that shank, how it sticks out right there. Well, I've never been quite happy with that part of it. But I've learned a lot in the days since then. So to help out, I have a piece of felt, some wire cutters, I have some glue, and this is a permanent acid-free glue that I used to use with scrapbooking, and I love it for lots of different things. And so I'm going to reattach this bunny. I've got some thread and needles and scissors and all that stuff. So let me show you how I'm going to do that. So step number one is to take this off. I'm going to start by snipping the threads that I sewed it down with, and then it'll be easier to cut the shank off. And we're going to cover up that hole, so I'm not too concerned about that. There's a couple more threads to snip. And I could have taken the shank off with the wire cutter while it was attached, but I risked damaging the fabric a little bit more, and I didn't want to do that. You can see my pretty sizable hole here. Now we need to deal with this bunny rabbit. I know I'm not going to be able to get it off at the base of the button. I believe I've tried that in the past. So what I'm going to do is we're going to take these wire cutters and cut as close as we can go. And the majority of that just popped right off. So let's take a look at the back. So it's still pretty rough. And I'm going to just sort of trim each side down to the best of my ability here. I may have to just take some sandpaper to it. And truthfully, what I usually end up using is just a nail file. I do want to make sure that the sharp edges are off as much as possible. So that's better. I'm not going to put the felt across the whole back of the bunny. I'm going to cut it in half here, this little piece that I've got. And you can see it's still going to need trimmed down, but I can feel where my prongs are. And I'm going to cut just a little hole right there so that this fits over those prongs. And so that will allow it to sit almost completely flat, and we'll trim that felt up. And if I need to, I can add a second layer and set that bunny up, but we're going to just do the one. This is just a PVA type glue. I'm going to just apply a little bit of that. We're going to go this way here. Press that down over that. And now I'm going to leave it to dry for a few minutes. I know from experience that this glue dries pretty quickly, but I want to make sure it adheres nice and firm before I start trying to trim it away. So now I'm going to add these pieces of muslin to this. I don't need a lot of fabric. I just need a little bit to sew along this top edge to help it stretch. And I don't really need it to go all the way because these ends are going to curl over, so I don't need it all the way down here. I just need it where the board is, and that just ended up being the perfect length. I am going to put this up along that upper edge, and I'm just going to run a little running stitch right along that top edge. And if you felt like you needed it to be stronger, you could certainly do it on the machine. I've stitched on the edges and I pressed them, and then I just want to double check and make sure none of that is going to show once we get it on there. So that's perfect. But let's check our little rabbit now and see if it's dry enough for the next step. It feels like it's adhering pretty well. Now I'm just going to take my scissors and I'm going to trim very carefully because it's still a little damp. And I'm just trimming around the edges. I don't want the felt to show, but I used this beige because it blends in with the bunny rabbit, and so that will help it be more invisible. You can hardly tell it's there. And so now I think I can stitch on that bunny, and it's going to sit flatter. He's still going to sit a little high, which is fine. Now what I want to do, and if I'd been thinking about it, I should have run thread through that felt before I glued it on, and I didn't think to do that. We'll have to just make do here. And I'm just going to run that through the felt, and now I'm just going to stitch this little guy down right around this hole. With him in position, I'm going to come back up and stitch back through that felt and back down through the piece without pulling the felt off, hopefully. I'm going to do that a couple of times, just sort of whip it carefully. And now he's adhered. He sits nice and flat, and I'm pretty happy with how that looks. So the next step is to attach him to my mat board. I have the back of the piece showing here. Need to see if I can pop this other staple out. There we go. When I cut my mat board, I cut a piece that is a little smaller than the opening. It's not quite 1/8 of an inch all the way around, and that's because we have the thickness of the fabric which needs to come around the mat board. And so when I put this in here, now there's room for that fabric to come around and it doesn't interfere with it. Let's just take a quick look from the other side. You can see how much it's puffed out, and that's because it's not stretched yet. And so that's going to be the next thing we're going to do. You could pad this if you wanted, but I don't really want it padded. So I'm going to leave it flat on the white mat board as is. When I do this, I make sure that I always buy the acid-free mat board. And then you don't have to worry about it being right against the fabric. This is not a terribly thick one, it's a thinner one. The next step is to put this on the mat board. I either use quilting cotton because it's nice and strong, or I use nylon beading thread. Either one works really well. I don't worry about too fine of a needle. I want it to be long enough I can grasp it easily. We're going to be making lots of stitches pretty quickly here, and I'm going to have to cut multiple lengths of thread. I start with, oh gosh, it's probably close to 6 feet of thread. And I'm going to put a big old fat knot in the end of it because I don't want it to pull through the fabric. And so there are a couple of ways of doing this. I generally have found that I like to start somewhere in the middle. I'm going to start on the back side with just a running stitch. I'm going to go just a little bit away. That's going to hide my knot on the back. And then we're going to go side to side. And we're going to work one direction, and then we're going to come back and work the other direction, and then we'll do the two ends. We're going to be turning it over and adjusting. So I'm going to go up a little bit, and I take a stitch that's about 1/4 of an inch long. Now I think I've shown this process before when I framed the old Holy Night piece. And so we're just going to go back and forth. We've got lots of time to tighten things up, so I don't necessarily pull it tight every time I go through. And it may seem like a lot of work, but I find for my purposes it gives me the best finish. I'm always really happy with the results. Years ago when I was doing lots of cross stitch, I used to try those sticky boards. I found that over time they discolored, and I could see that discoloration through the project. I just was never happy with them. This method, it's temporary. I can take it off. If I'm unhappy with how it turned out, I can redo it very easily, and so I appreciate that part of it. And after you've put all the time in to do all that stitching, I think it's worth taking the time to make it archivally a little bit easier to manage and care for. You know, whether that's for yourself or for a possible future generation that wants to do something with it. I'll put it a little closer together here at the end. Let's just turn it over and see how it's looking. Now we can adjust it. I can pull that around. There we go. And that will look nice. I'm pretty happy with that. Rather than knot it off, I'm going to leave enough thread that I can knot it off on that side. So I'm going to turn it around and we're going to go the other way. And the reason I'm not tying it off is I want to be able to tighten it and adjust it as I see fit as we get toward the end. And I just realized one thing with this one, and that is that I had never signed this piece. Let's do that real quick. Let's do it over here on my loose end. So this will be subtle, but it'll have my name on it. And I just think it's so important as a needle artist to take credit for the work that you do. In the painting world, everybody signs their work, and I just feel like too many women doing needlework don't take credit for what they're doing. They're doing beautiful works of art in fabric and thread. This is not the most beautiful signature in the world, but it's there. And then I also often sign it a second time. I have a micron pen. These are archival and they're good on fabric in the long term. So I'll sign my name. Let's go over here. It won't bleed through. And I'm going to put the year. And as you can see, you can't see anything through. Now my name is on there in a couple of spots, and that just makes me happy. I want to make sure it's as tight as it needs to go. And so I can just pick up these loops on the back, and I don't have to do every single one, but I can go several over and pull and get it nice and tight. Pretty happy with how that's looking. And I'm going to tie that section off. Now that we've got that part already tightened down, let's tighten up this other section here. Alright, you can see just how nice and smooth that pulls everything. In the frame, this will help keep it from sagging as well. So I think I'm pretty happy with that. So now I'm going to knot that off so that that tension stays. And then we're going to go lengthwise. This time I think I'm going to actually work all the way across. On this one, I want to tuck my end in so that it's a little bit neater on the back. And so I'm just going to actually take a little running stitch there. I want to make sure with this silk that I am catching the muslin and not just the silk, because the silk will just pull right out. And then we're going to do the same thing. So I'm going to go a little narrower at the edge here. Okay, so now we're going to look at the front, make any adjustments we need to make. There's some heavier cord that comes up over the edges, so there's a couple of spots that it's not going to flatten out completely, but I'm pretty happy with that. I think that's actually pretty well stretched now. So I'm going to make my knot. It's under enough tension, I'm going to make 2. I've got the stretched piece showing in the little shelf. I noticed that my signature is barely visible, and that's going to be okay. It's still there, so if somebody wants to figure out who stitched it years from now, they'll be able to figure that out. I do need to paint the shelf. It just looks dirty to me, and I don't like that look, so I'm going to repaint that. So let me go paint a shelf, and I will see you later. Well, it is the next day, and I got my shelf painted, and I'm really happy with it. It's just an off-white. I've got my stretched piece here sitting in it at the moment. But let's turn it over. It's going to sit in here, but I don't really want this exposed. So I've got this cardstock, and I'm just going to use it to put sort of a dust cover across the back. Now, I could cover the whole thing, but I think I'm just going to cover that section. To measure this, I'm going to do this in the simplest way possible. I'm going to just mark here and here. So I'm marking just inside that line. And then I'm going to just turn it around and make sure that that line still works. I have my old paper cutter here. So I have my mark. I'm going to bring this along. I've got my guides here at the bottom. I'm lining that mark up in the center here. I'm going to cut there. And then I don't have much to take off on this end. There's just maybe an 1/8 of an inch, maybe ever so slightly more. We're just going to trim that off. Now we're going to just see how it fits. We may need to trim slightly more. We'll see. So I'm going to do this without anything in it. It could come down just a tiny bit on length. So I'm not going to take much, maybe a 1/16 of an inch. It's not a whole lot. So I'm looking at my piece, so I know which way is up. We're going to put that centered in there, and this is just going to literally sit right over the top of it as I put this in. I have just a set of nails, and I have a few of these small, there's a couple sizes in here, so we're going to go with the smaller ones. This is not thick, so this has to go in at a pretty shallow angle, and I already know I'm going to have to bend that nail over. I just want to get it in far enough to hold this piece in. Alright, so there, that's going to do. I'm not showing on the outside. That down. I'm going to turn it in to put the one on the other side. Again, I'm going to use the needle nose plier here to hold the nail while I hammer it in place. That one went in really easy. There. And we're not showing on the outside. So now I'd like to put in probably 2 on each long length here. This wood is thankfully nice and soft. I don't think Let's look at it. I think the next thing to do is to hang it on the wall. So let's go and do that. I've had this empty frame hanging on the wall for quite a long time now, and I'm thinking that might actually be a really good spot to hang this little shelf. I haven't even started stitching that lace hanky onto the linen that's going to go in that frame. I'm thinking I'll take that down and put that little shelf there. Now I have to think about where I want it. If I put it too low and I hang stuff on it, it'll hang over other things. So I think I actually want to put it up pretty high. Really similar to what I had with the other one. But I know if I eyeball it, my level is going to be off. I've got my level out, and I'm just marking in these simple little hangers where the peak of that is. And I'm going to put a little nail there. So this is going to be really easy. But look, right there. Let's check our level. Still right in the center. Wonderful. What do you think? I could put a couple of things. There's a beautiful little pin cushion. So I'm pretty happy with my little shelf. I'm undecided about hanging stuff on it. It does make it look a little messier. But it does give me a place that I can use to display a couple of nice things. That's one more project I can check off of my very long list of projects. I'm thrilled to have that done. Thanks for coming along with me today as we finish this little silk ribbon embroidery project and got it hung up on the wall. It is crazy quilted, but it's also mostly focused on silk ribbon embroidery. It was something I enjoyed so much, and I'm so glad that I'll be able to have it out and enjoy it now. Thank you so much for watching. Happy stitching. I'll see you in the next video.